Are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to 1 Samuel 17. I wrote this about 35 years ago, something like that. Some of you I've shared it with, but it's been a long time, so allow me to share it with you again, please. To the field of Elah Valley rode a shepherd one fine day. He went looking for his brothers. He didn't go up there to stay. He was sent there by his father, just a teen when he made the trip. He was just a little shepherd. He had a slingshot on his hip. The Hebrews and the Philistines had drawn the battle line. The shepherd boy was sent to see that all was going fine. He didn't go to cause no trouble. He didn't go to make a rift. He was just a little shepherd who had a slingshot on his hip. In this valley was a soldier. Goliath was his name. He terrorized Yahweh's people, blasphemed Yahweh's name. He was vicious and a killer, and he stood about 10 feet 4, taunting every morning with his curses. He would roar. But on this day he sent his challenge, and his curses filled the air. And the shepherd boy got angry and said to the soldiers there, "Someone needs to go and stop him. Someone needs to pop his lip." Then the shepherd said he'd do it with a slingshot on his hip. It wasn't long before that message got relayed to his king Saul. And the king was very worried about that shepherd boy. He said, "You can't go out and face him. Well, there's no way you'd survive. He's been killing longer than you've even been alive." "Oh, let not your heart be troubled," said the shepherd to the king. "To take down that big giant to Yahweh is a small thing. Through him I have ripped up lions, through him I have punched out bears, and when that heathen goes down, Yahweh's glory I'll declare." The shepherd left the king's side and he walked down by the creek. 5 smooth stones he picked up. The giant he went to meet. You could hear Goliath shouting profanities from his lips as that shepherd boy approached him with a slingshot on his hip. "Do you think that you can fight me?" Goliath asked the lad. "There's no way you hurt me. You'll only make me mad. I'll rip your flesh, I'll break your bones, I'll cause you lots of hurt. And when I'm finished with you, boy, I'll feed you to the birds." "Well, the words you speak may have once been true," the shepherd boy replied, "but on this day the words you say are nothing more than lies. But the word of Yahweh is sure and true, and on his word I stand. And in his name I say to you, you'll die here at my hand." Angered by that shepherd's words, Goliath made his play. And the courage of that shepherd is still talked about today. He placed a stone within his sling and then he let it rip, and that shepherd's aim was deadly with the slingshot on his hip. It was over in just a moment, and the soldiers gathered round. There before them laid the body of Goliath on the ground. Oh, he might have gone on living, but he made a fatal slip when he dared to face that shepherd who had a slingshot on his hip. 1 Samuel 17 is that story. So let's go look at that, please. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and pitched between Socoh and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. So before we read on, let's deal with that phrase. They set the battle in array. I was 19 years old when I read this story, and I first looked that word up. When I read the narrative, that word is used more than once, and it stood out to me. And I thought, well, I wonder what they mean the battle was set in array. Looking that word up started me on a journey that I cherish to this day. I am still amazed at how the proper definition of a Hebrew word or a Greek word can shed great light on a text. And it happened then, and it still happens to this day. This word translated array means to be perfectly arranged. It means for everything to be set in order. So the battle is set in perfect order. Everybody is perfectly arranged so that it looks like two countries and their armies are at war. Looks like. You got that? A lot of difference between being and looking like. The battle is set in array means it looked like a battle. It looked like a war. It was picture perfect. The Philistines would rise up every morning, put on their armor, chant their war cries. Israel would rise up every morning, say their morning prayers, dress for battle, sound the shofar, chant their war cries. But nobody is doing any fighting. This is explained to us beginning in verse 3, so look there again. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. In other words, it's picture perfect. You fly a drone over it, take a picture of it, perfect picture of what a war should look like. Yeah. And there went out a champion. We need to pay attention to what we're told here. There went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. A champion is translated from 2 Hebrew words. First one is ish, and it means man. The next one is benayim. Benayim means a double interval. An interval is just a space between two things. This means double interval, or double the space, a space between, okay? Benayim comes from the Hebrew word bain, which means, we studied it when we studied Passover, the lamb is to be slain when? Betwixt the evenings, between the evenings. King James says in the evening or at the evening, but the Hebrew word is bain, which means betwixt the evenings, okay? So that's what this word comes from. In verse 51, you'll see that they refer to Goliath as the Philistines' champion. That's a different word altogether. It's the Hebrew word Geber. And Geber doesn't mean champion. There's actually no Hebrew word for champion in the Bible. But it's translated here champion, nowhere else. Geber's translated champion. Everywhere else it's translated as a valiant man or a mighty man. Okay? Benayim doesn't mean champion. Benayim means betwixt or between. Now, I wouldn't stop talking about this if it wasn't important. So, literally, here's what verse 3 says. There went out a man between, out of the camp of the Philistines. Well, what did they mean by that? There went out a man between. Originally, when I studied this, all I could think of was perhaps it meant there went out a man between the two mountains, because the Philistines are on the mountain on one side, children of Israel on the mountain on the other side. Maybe it means there went out a man between the two mountains. I no longer think that's what it means. I think that they tell us what it means and explain what it means by the odd phrase by the next phrase. It says he was a man between who was from Gath. Now, why is it important to let us know that he was from Gath? Flip over to Joshua chapter 11 and let's find the significance of that. Joshua 11, look in verse 21. And at that time came Joshua, cut off the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah, from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua destroyed them utterly with their cities. The Anakim. Deuteronomy chapter 2 identifies for us that the Anakim were a hybrid race of giants. Right. Deuteronomy 2 tells us that. They were a hybrid race of being who were the offspring of the sons of God who came down unto the daughters of men. Now read verse 22. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza, Gath, Ashdod there remained. The only place these Anakim giants still existed were in three cities, Gath, Gaza, and Ashdod. So when we go back to 1 Samuel 17 verse 4, it says Goliath was a man between. It seems to me they are telling us in three different ways that Goliath was a hybrid. First of all is by that description, a man between. That's an odd description of a man between. But it seems to me they're saying to us, he is between being a man and some other species. He's not fully man, and he's not fully that other species. He's something in between those two. The second reason, or the second thing they tell us that lets us know Goliath was a hybrid, is they tell us he was from Gath. This became the stronghold of the giant species known as the Anakim. The third thing they tell us is they give us the dimensions of this man. They share with us his enormous size. His size might have been thought a misprint had they not first told us that he was not fully man, and had they not first told us he was from Gath. It would be real easy for some Bible scholar to look at it and say, well, there's no way he could be 6 cubits in a span. That's a misprint. But when you take the other two things they tell you about him, then you understand it's not a misprint. Right. That this is some kind of hybrid being. His size is 6 cubits in a span. There are different sources for the length of a span. I'm not going to go into all of that this morning. We've studied that before, but at a bare minimum, he's 9 feet 9 inches tall. Bare minimum. But he could have been as tall as 11 feet 4 inches. At 11 feet 4 inches, proportioned out, he would have weighed approximately 1,100 pounds. Now, he's not just a big man. Some people like to explain it away and say, well, Goliath was just a big man. No, he's not just a big man. Shaquille O'Neal, that's a big man. Goliath was a hybrid species of being. Okay? Verse 5. He had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. So the armored coat that he put on weighed approximately 150 pounds. How many of us could carry that around in battle? He had greaves of brass upon his legs and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, which is going to be 2.5 inches in diameter. And his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. How much does your maul weigh? I know you've got a maul, don't you? 10 pounds or so. And mine only weighs 8. You're bigger than I am. So. Yeah. So a maul that we use to split firewood, 8 pounds, 10 pounds. His spearhead weighed 3 times that. Wow. 20 to 22 pounds on the spearhead connected to a shaft that was 2.5 inches in diameter. That's huge. A big man couldn't handle that. No. It takes a giant of a hybrid species to handle that. He stood and cried with the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are you come out to set your battle in array? It confused him. Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. Why do you keep coming out here and pretending that we are in war? You chant, we chant. I'm tired of chanting, let's dance. Yeah. Send somebody over here. It's time to get busy, right? Verse 9. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants? Well, no, if he kills you, you're not going to be their servants. He shouldn't have used the word we right there, should he? If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will they be your servants. But he says we. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall you be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Now, those are strong words. I defy. That word defy means expose, reproach, blaspheme, rail against. In other words, Goliath is saying, I expose you right now as being a bunch of nobodies who follow a nobody, who belong to a nothing country, and you serve a nobody Elohim. I expose you as being nothings and nobodies, a bunch of pretenders. You're nothing, your nation is nothing, your king is nothing, your Elohim is nothing. Now, if you disagree, come over here and see me and let's talk about it. That's what he's saying. Well, how'd they respond? When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they, Saul and all of the army, Saul's included in this. When Saul and all Israel heard the words of this Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. They were so, now understand, Saul's a big man. He was head and shoulders above everybody else in Israel in height. But he is dismayed and greatly afraid. They're so terrified they can barely stand up. Their minds and hearts are filled with confusion. Now understand, we're talking about men who've been trained for battle. These are men who are supposed to be seasoned and tough. Yet when they saw Goliath and when they heard Goliath, their knees buckled and they literally trembled in great fear. So the scene's been set. You got two armies set in array. You got one giant running his big fat mouth, and this went on for 40 days. 40 days. Now, the narrative is going to shift a little bit. We're going to be introduced to another character. So we pick up in verse 12. They set the scene. Now they introduce us to another character. Verse 12. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the name of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. What does that mean, David went and returned from Saul? He had been with Saul before in days of peace. He was the guy that sat in the palace and played the harp. He was a musician, young teenager, playing the harp. But when they went to war, he went back home to take care of the few sheep he was in charge of. Verse 16, and the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself. How long? 40 days. Jesse said unto David his son, take now for your brethren an ephah of this parched corn, these 10 loaves, run to the camp to your brethren. Carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how your brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now what that means is, bring me back something from each one of them that indicates to me they're okay. I don't want you to just come back and say, Dad, they're okay. You bring me something back from every one of them. Let them write a note. Let them send me something, but I want a pledge from each one that they're doing okay. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. Well, they're supposed to be. Yeah. Verse 20. David rose up early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, took and went as Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight and shouted for the battle. Understand, this is the 40th day. Yeah. Every morning for 40 days they've been doing the same thing, this soldier stuff. Anybody watching from a distance would have been impressed at how official they looked and how official they sounded. But they had actually been cowered down to being men who did nothing that mattered. Now, we've already been told they were terrified. No doubt, I think, they woke up every morning praying. Don't you think they went to bed at night praying? Right? Were they also making faith confessions? I don't know. I believe that no weapon formed against me shall prosper. I don't know. Maybe every day they started saying, I believe that Goliath's going to wake up dead tomorrow. I don't know. This I do know. They're still setting the battle in array 40 days later. Verse 21 tells us, for Israel and the Philistines have put the battle in array, army against army, every day the same drill. Verse 22, David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage and ran into the army and came and saluted his brethren. Now understand, David doesn't know that this is all just a drill. He's a teenager. He comes pulling up in his carriage, and it looks like a full-blown war is taking place. You could hear the rattling of swords. You could hear the clanging of shields. You could hear men shouting battle cries. It's a dangerous-looking situation when he comes pulling up. So what does he do? Runs right down in the middle of it. Doesn't hesitate, doesn't cower, doesn't wait, doesn't see if somebody's going to come get him. He just runs right down in the middle of it. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the man between. Man that's between being a human and being something else. The Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name. He came up out of the armies of the Philistines and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. You know, it's amazing how some people can learn to just tune stuff out. And you hear and see things that they no longer hear and see. Yeah. Right? I think it's significant there that they're telling us David heard them. After 40 days, others got to where they just didn't listen anymore. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore or very afraid. And the men of Israel said, listen to their questions. Have you seen this man that's come up? Surely to defy Israel he has come up. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. They are like, when I read that verse, I understand they are like a lot of confused people today. Their phrase, surely to defy Israel, he has come up. They have started thinking that it must be Yahweh's will for Goliath to be there and be doing what he's doing. Surely to defy Israel he has come up means they reason that Yahweh must have wanted them to be defiled, stripped down, made ashamed, embarrassed. That they deserved it somehow, and that's the will of God. No, Yahweh wanted that hybrid of Satan taken out. Yeah. That was his will. So they talked about the reward the king's offering to the man who will do this, and it's a decent reward. 1, he'll be made rich. 2, well, I guess it depends on who she is, but 2, he gets to marry the king's daughter. That could be a reward. 3, his family would never have to pay taxes again. Not a bad offer. But the reward should have never been the focus to start with. Their focus should have been that they are Yahweh's army. And that is Yahweh's enemy. And if he's Yahweh's enemy, he's my enemy. Right. And I'm going to fight him knowing that he's Yahweh's enemy and my enemy. I'm going to fight him knowing that Yahweh will fight with me. Because he's not just my enemy, he's Yahweh's enemy. And if I'm going to take on Yahweh's enemy, Yahweh is going to fight with me. That should have been their thinking, but it's not. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, tell me again, what shall be done to the man that kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living Elohim? What shall be given to the man who takes away the reproach from Israel? Reproach means shame and disgrace. Actually, it means pudinda. By using that sentence, David is saying to this army, listen to me, it can get lost in translation, but here's what David, by using that sentence, here's what he said to that army. Y'all are acting like a bunch of schoolgirls. Listen to his next question. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living Elohim? He is calling upon these soldiers to recognize who they are and who that giant is. The giant is uncircumcised, which simply means he has no covenant with Yahweh. Right. No covenant. There's a man standing over there running his mouth that doesn't have a covenant with the Creator of the heavens and the earth. We have a covenant. And he hasn't just defied you. When he defied you, he defied the army of the living Elohim. You're not just you. You're not just an army. You're Yahweh's army. Yeah. That's a powerful point this young teenager is making. Verse 27. The people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that kills him. David said he has no covenant. You're the army of Yahweh. And they said, so shall it be done to the man that kills him. In other words, they said, we hear you, young kid. There he is. If you want some of him, go get it. Yeah. We're not going. Yeah. Verse 28. And Eliab, David's eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why did you come down here? With whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride, the naughtiness of your heart, for you are come down that you might see the battle. Notice that the one Yahweh is going to use to deliver Israel and to take this hybrid of Satan out. Notice that he's the one who gets attacked. Yeah. No one is attacking the Philistines. They've had 40 days. They ain't sent one arrow over there yet. Nobody has dared stand on the mountain and shouted back any resistance to Goliath. They just let him run his mouth and never say a word. But David starts asking questions, and he is viciously and immediately attacked. He is falsely accused of being in a place that he doesn't belong. He's falsely accused of being a nobody. Those few sheep. You are a nobody who has no importance, who does nothing. You ought to keep your mouth shut, is what his brother's saying to him. He's falsely accused of being proud or arrogant. His confidence and commitment to do what was right was interpreted by those who lived in fear and compromise as being arrogance. But it's not arrogance, it's just confidence. He was falsely accused of having a naughty heart. That is, they falsely accused him of just being a bad person in general. Just generally speaking, you are not a good man. That's what his brother said to him. Wow. He's falsely accused of having pleasure in watching battles. Verse 29, maybe two of the most important sentences in this narrative. David said, number one, what have I done? What have I now done? Let's not talk about what I might have done back home. Let's talk about right now, where I'm at. What have I now done? Because the only thing he has done so far is to refuse to be as afraid as everybody else. Let that sink in. A lot of people walking around wearing masks, mad at you. You're not as afraid as they are. That's the only thing he's done. Refuse to show fear. And the other thing he's done is express an interest in finding out how to fix the mess. So let's read. And he says to Eliab, please explain to me what I have now done. Second thing he said is there not a cause? That's a great question. They're angry at David. Their anger should have been directed at other places. Their anger should have been directed at one another for allowing it to get to this place. That a young shepherd's got to show up to deal with it. Their anger should have been directed at the Philistines. Their anger should have been directed at Goliath. Instead, they choose to be angry with the instrument of Yahweh who has been sent to stop the steal. Goliath seeking to steal Israel's hope, glory, and heritage. David has been sent to stop it. Verse 30. And he turned from him toward another and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. Don't you admire a man no matter how young or old? Don't you admire a man that cannot be bullied? His brother tried to bully him back in that carriage and away from there. He refused to be bullied. There was a cause. So David continued testing the army to see if all of them had been corrupted by fear and intimidation, or was there anybody in that whole army that might be willing to take a stand. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. Saul sent for David. Now, what was Saul going to say to David? You ever stop to think about that? He sent for him. What is it he wants to say? Was he going to say, son, I got enough trouble without you being here stirring up more. I need you to get in your carriage and go to the house. Or was he just curious when they came and told him? Was he just curious, we'll bring that guy here, maybe hoping David was some kind of super soldier? But when he looked at David, of course, that went out there. He's just a kid. Young boy, teenage boy, maybe 13 or 14 years old, they say. We don't know what Saul was going to say because David never gave him a chance to speak. He came through the flaps of his tent and made an announcement, and rightly so. Saul has had 40 days to fix it. He's done nothing except put on a show to make it look like he's doing something. You with me? Mm-hmm. He's had 40 days to do something. And the only thing he did is made his army get up every morning and go through their drills so it looked like he's doing something. So verse 32, David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And fight is really a insufficient word to translate that Hebrew word. The word David actually used means this: your servant will go and devour this Philistine, or consume this Philistine, or prevail over this Philistine. David has no intention of fighting Goliath in some kind of physical struggle. He has every intention of going out there and annihilating that guy. And that's the word he used. Don't let your heart fail. Let no man's heart fail. I'm about to go out there and rid this mountain of that man. Love this guy, don't you? Yeah. Verse 33. And Saul said to David, you're not able. Wow. La-di-da-da-da. You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. This thing is bigger and more dangerous than you're able to comprehend. It's not fixable. If it was fixable, I would have already fixed it. Yeah. If it's fixable, we would have already fixed it. It's foolish to believe you can fix it. David said to Saul, your servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, took a lamb out of the flock. I didn't go home crying to Mom. Right?
Right.
I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I caught him by the beard and smote him. I was willing to let him walk away. All I wanted was my lamb back. I got my lamb, and then that crazy bear decided he wanted the lamb back. I caught him by his beard and killed him. Verse 36. Well, you gotta allow yourself to picture this kid doing this. His dad sends him out to take care of a few sheep, and he's killing lions and bears. Don't you know that's freaking Mama out? Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Mom, look what I brought home today. Yeah. Right? David said, moreover, Yahweh that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he'll deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, Yahweh be with you. I don't think he ever expected to see David again. Saul armed David with his armor, put a helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. Now I do have to ask myself why he did that though. I think on the one hand he understands that his mindset is that in order to fight there's a certain uniform you have to wear and there's a certain way you have to engage in battle. And so you got to use these methods that we've approved. Second, if by some slim chance David did win, Saul wants the credit. Yeah. Put my armor on. He didn't turn to another soldier and say, hey, let him have your armor. Saul gave him his armor. Verse 39. David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. That is, he was hesitant to go because he had not proved it. David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off of him. He took his staff in his hand, that is a shepherd's staff, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook. And he put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistines. So he leaves Saul's tent, goes across that valley with a shepherd's stick, sling in his hand, and 5 smooth stones in a pouch, and that's all he's got. Verse 41. Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. When the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, despised him, had scorn for him, because he was but a youth and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. He despised and had scorn for him because he realized that Israel had sent over there to him just a young, good-looking kid. Young, good-looking kid. Yeah. About Colin's age, probably about Colin's build. Not near as good-looking as Colin, but something like that. Yeah. That's what this big 11'4" guy sees coming. Yeah. And he can't believe what he's seeing. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with staves? In other words, he saw that stick in David's hand and said, are you going to whip me like a puppy? Is that what you think you're going to do, boy? And the Philistine cursed David by his Elohims. You see, he worshiped gods that were really demons. He worshiped Elohims. He is what we would call today Luciferian. Everything that's a part of his worship is traced back to Lucifer. And he's cursing David by his Luciferian religion. And the Philistine said to David, come to me. Come here, boy. I'm going to give your flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Or, I'll rip your flesh, I'll break your bones, I'll cause you lots of hurt, and when I'm finished with you, boy, I'm going to feed you to the birds. Then said David to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to you in the name of Yahweh of hosts, the Elohim of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. When you picked a fight with us, big boy, you picked a fight with him, and that's a fight you're going to lose every time. This day will Yahweh deliver you into my hand, and I will smite you. I'll take your head from you. I'll give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air. You talk about you're going to feed my flesh to the fowls of the air. I'm going to take the flesh of your entire army and feed it to the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know there is an Elohim in Israel. I'm not just going to cut off your head, big boy. I'm going to kill all your buddies too. A kid saying that to a hybrid.
Yeah.
In the next verse, David turns and addresses the armies of Israel. They're on the hill behind him watching and listening, and he's well aware that they're watching and listening to everything he's saying to Goliath, and Goliath saying to him. So the next words he utters to Goliath is really meant for them. Verse 47. And all this assembly, I can see him pointing back there at him. All this assembly shall know that Yahweh saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is Yahweh's, and he'll give you into our hands. In other words, David is letting them know that any one of them could have done what he's about to do, because it's not him that's doing it, it's Yahweh working through him that did it. It's Yahweh that saves, he said. But where there's a need for Yahweh, there's need of a man. And he would have gladly used any one of those other men standing on the hill, but none of them would do it, David says, so here I am. But I'm going to show them what they could have done if they understood who Yahweh is and what Yahweh wants to accomplish. Came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that means those words infuriated him and he goes into full attack mode, that David hasted and ran right at Goliath toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in the bag, took thence a stone, slung it, smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran, stood upon the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of the sheath thereof, slew him, cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their Geber, champion, was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose, finally, and shouted, finally, and pursued the Philistines, finally, until you come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron, and the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way of Sha'araim, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. So they pursued them and killed them all the way till they got inside the safe gates of Gath and Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I cannot tell. I don't have a clue who he is. And the king said, well, inquire thou whose son this stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, you young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant, Jesse the Bethlehemite. On May the 2nd, 2020, I stood and exposed that the coronavirus was nothing more than a hoax meant to steal the election, and to further set up an agenda that has as its goal the depopulation of the world. An agenda that wants to reduce the population from 7 billion to 500 million. That is 600 billion, 500 million people eliminated. I was criticized for using the pulpit to talk about political issues, not by you, but by others. I was criticized because I said President Trump is not just fighting against rhinos and never Trumpers. He's not just fighting against deep state plants who were put there to undermine his agenda. He was not just fighting against Democratic leaders and their billionaire globalist puppeteers, but I said he is fighting against the world that wants America to crumble. I was criticized for daring to say that from a pulpit. On May 16th, when I used Scripture to prove that we are not obligated to obey the mandates of an ungodly, evil government, I was criticized for daring to speak about political issues and daring to challenge government authority. On October 31st, when I spoke of the moronic individuals who said they would not vote because to do so was to them choosing between the lesser of two evils, I was criticized for saying that. I dared in all these messages to warn against making the same mistake that Israel made and murmuring against Moses. It's amazing how many people got upset about that, saying, how dare you liken Moses to Trump or Trump to Moses? Well, if you listen to what I said, I didn't liken Trump to Moses. I likened the people that followed Moses to us, murmuring against him. I dared in those messages to warn against the evil plots of evil people so evil that it's hard for normal humans to comprehend how evil their evil really is. Child sacrifice, child trafficking, depopulation. It's hard to comprehend how evil these people are for normal people. I dared in those messages to warn against being so spiritually dead that you cannot see that Trump had been placed where he was by Yahweh. And I actually was shocked at how some got offended by those messages. I heard in my spirit, never have I said Yahweh said it, I said I just heard in my spirit, and I continue to say and to post those words that I heard in my spirit. I heard in my spirit, trust Trump. And people in their self-righteous hearts respond to me in hateful ways saying, I'll never trust any man. My trust is in Yahweh. Well, bless your darling heart. Of course we trust Yahweh. But can somebody be so biblically illiterate that they don't know that in order to trust Yahweh, you have to trust men who He raises up? Right. Because everything He does in the earth, He does through men. He gave men dominion over the earth. So if you're going to trust Yahweh, then you also have to trust Moses and Samuel and David and Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Amos and Hosea and Malachi. You also have to trust Peter and James and John. If you say, I trust Yahweh, you have to trust those men. And if you say, I don't trust those men, then you'll never be able to trust Yahweh. Right. And today, I say you have to trust Trump. Because Yahweh put him in place. And I say Yahweh put him in place because it took a miracle to get him there. The establishment who lies and cheats and manipulates stated emphatically, Trump will never be president. They said it over and over and over. They didn't say, we hope he won't. They said it emphatically, he will never be the president. And laughed at anybody who was stupid enough to believe that he might be. Yeah. How could they say such a thing? Because they were certain that their fortress of deceit and corruption could never be penetrated. But Yahweh broke down those walls and put Trump in. And Trump has done marvelous things. I'm not talking about the economy. I'm talking about how he greatly handicapped Planned Parenthood. I'm talking about how he arrested dozens of people involved in child abduction and human trafficking. I'm talking about how he rescued multitudes of children who were being sold as sex slaves. If he had done nothing else, everyone who claims to live by biblical principles should have been singing his praises and shouting their support for him. But biblically illiterate people who have been brainwashed by false teachers, are convinced that what will be, and that we should not engage in political talk nor worry about confronting the government because it's all the will of God, they say. I say that's absolute absurdity. Let me ask you, who did Abraham have to combat to rescue Lot? Was it not 5 kings? 5 kings and their generals and their armies? 5 Luciferian, Satan worship, Lucifer worship kings and countries that he had to combat? Yes, it was. Who did Moses have to fight to deliver Israel from Egypt and into the promised land? Multitude of people. But it began with Pharaoh, a governmental and religious system that was hell-bent on destroying Yahweh's seed from the earth. It was Luciferian. Every wicked Canaanite nation that came in and took possession of the land that belonged to Abraham and his seed, every ite he fought against had politicians and religious rulers who backed those politicians. That's who Moses had to fight against. Who was it that threw Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah into the burning fiery furnace? It was a corrupt political system bent toward worshiping Lucifer. Who did every prophet that ever lived in any generation have to combat? I'll tell you who. It was wicked kings, wicked princes, wicked false teachers who had become determined to eliminate Yahweh's seed from the earth, and their worship was of Lucifer. Who did Yeshua have to war against? It was a political system empowered by and contaminated by a Luciferian religious group. Peter, James, John, all of them were persecuted by corrupt politicians and wicked religious people sold out to Lucifer. So I say, if they fought against the political, governmental, and religious systems, then it is apparent to me that we cannot serve Yahweh and also fight against corrupt political, religious systems that are servants of Lucifer. If they had to fight against them, so must we. Yes. To be silent is to give consent to their rule. To speak out is both biblical and necessary. Yes. I began every service with, are you ready for the word? Right. And when I dare to point out the Luciferian actions of corrupt politicians or false teachers, I'm teaching the Bible. Yes. And when I say trust Trump, I'm teaching the Bible. When I look at today and I look into the Bible, I see parallels. I saw a parallel between how Moses was treated by those who murmured against him Yahweh raised him up, and yet people murmured against him. I saw a parallel between that and how Yahweh raised up Trump, and how many people who say they believe the Bible murmured against him because he wasn't sweet enough.
Right.
And I see a parallel between David slaying Goliath and what Trump has done, is doing, and will do. Let me explain. I know we've gone a while, but let me explain. In the story of 1 Samuel 17, you have a supernatural enemy who is empowered by Satan himself. You have a nation and an army that has sworn their allegiance to the gods that empower Goliath, which are demons, which are ruled by Satan. So their religious and political system is Luciferian, rooted in, guided by, seeking to establish the will of Lucifer in the earth and to destroy the seed of Yahweh from the earth. Then you have the people of Israel back home, who sent out King Saul and sent out the army to defeat the Philistines and Goliath. And when they sent out Saul and they sent out the army, Saul and the army said, "We'll go take care of this." They put on the armor, picked up their swords, took the pay, and accepted the commission. But when they got there, the task was too daunting for them. And so they just began to go through the motions and do nothing. Please tell me you see the parallel. Year after year, decade after decade, we knew there was a Luciferian enemy attacking us as a people, stealing our money and giving it to others, removing and outlawing biblical principles from work, from school, from our documents. Any mention of the Creator of the heavens and the earth is snatched from the schools, snatched from the workplace, made illegal. We saw them empowering our enemies. We saw them stealing elections. And so we would vote again and again for men and women who promised us they would go drain the swamp. And many of them were sincere. Not all, but many of them were sincere. So they took the pay, they put on the suits, they went to war, and they found the task too daunting. Some of them trembled in fear and did nothing. Some of them were bribed and bought off. Some fought a little, but did so in their flesh and were quickly defeated. But finally, after 40 long days, in the Bible, 40 represents days of testings and trial. Goliath was there for 40 days. That represents testing and trial. But never stop there, because always when the Bible uses this 40 not only represents days of testing and trial, but it also represents that after the testing and trial, positive changes are about to come. Positive changes are coming about. Okay? Yeshua was tempted for 40 days and 40 nights. But when he came out of that desert, he came out of that desert with the power of the Ruach HaKodesh upon him. Positive changes were about to take place. So after 40 days, 40 long days, David shows up. And what happened when he did? He began to encourage those who were there before he was. He began to encourage them to stand firm. He reminded people that the enemy looks overwhelming, but the enemy has no covenant with Yahweh. He reminded them that they are the army of the living Elohim. What happened next? He was falsely accused, criticized, and attacked. He's called arrogant. He is told that he's no good, has no idea what's going on, what he's doing. He's told to go home. Please tell me. You can see the parallel. Trump came in with a message of hope. He came in to encourage. He came in to exhort us to make a stand and to once again believe that we are one nation under Yahweh, indivisible. He came in encouraging us to once again believe that. And the attacks began. He's called crude and arrogant and mean, incompetent. He's told to go home. He has no place there. He needs to go back to his businesses and leave the government to people who know how to run governments. Not only was he told this by his enemies, but he was told this by the very people he was fighting to protect. It wasn't the Philistines verbally assaulting David, it was his own people. It wasn't the Philistines who told David to go home. It was Saul who told him he couldn't do it. Saul in his arrogance was saying, if I couldn't get it done, there's no way it can be done. And son, you don't realize how formidable, powerful this enemy is. He's a killer. We're doing the best we can. Please tell me you see the parallel. Let Saul represent the Republicans. Yeah. They brought Trump in after he's elected and they said, we've been here for decades. We see the corruption. We see the evil that you see. But trust us, there's nothing that can be done. Go along to get along. There's nothing that can be done, certainly not by you. If it could have been done, we'd have already done it, but the enemy is too powerful. We just have to do the best we can. That's what they've been saying to him for 4 years. Then there's old Goliath over there running his mouth, roaring with his curses coming forth from his Elohims. You understand there's a cabal that's been working in the earth and their power cannot be overstated. They're Luciferian to the core, and their control of politicians and media is, to say the least, astounding. And they've cursed Trump and said, do you think you can fight us? Yeah. The whole world rose up against this man. Not just the Democrats, not just the never-Trumpers, not just BLM or Antifa. The whole world rose up against him and said, do you think you honestly can fight us? We'll destroy you and everybody that follows you. We'll deprogram them and reprogram them and rid the earth of you. And it seemed to be true because it has been true for decades. But there is one thing that made a difference this time that they didn't count on. Yahweh put Trump there. David utters his words to Goliath. And Goliath made the first move. Goliath come charging at him to rid the earth of him. David then took him out. I've never been more nervous about saying anything than I am about what I'm about to say right now. When Goliath charged, David moved and took him out. I am convinced that President Trump said what he had to say. And then he sat back and allowed them to carry out this massive voter fraud and corruption so that you and I could see just how evil they are. And when they committed this massive international fraud, he let his stone fly. I can't help but believe in my heart that he has slain the giant. It may not look like it yet, but I believe he has. And now it's time for us to do as the children of Israel did, to arise and shout and pursue. It's time for us to give Trump the recognition and support that he deserves. Slaying Goliath is just the beginning of the battle.
Yes.
I do not know what lies ahead in the next few days. But I say to you once again what I heard in my spirit in the beginning of 2020. Trust Trump. Not because Trump is some brilliant man. I say it only because I believe there's no way he could be sitting there had Yahweh not put him there. And this supernatural enemy Goliath looked like he could never be taken down. And this supernatural cabal, Luciferian power that covers the earth looks undefeatable, indefeatable, can't be defeated. However you want to say it. But I believe they've been dealt a death blow. If I'm wrong, I'll be back to tell you. But for now, I trust that Yahweh put Trump in office for a reason. And believing that he put Trump in office for a reason, the reason isn't accomplished yet. So he's not through with Trump yet. Let me end with a certainty, something that I do know beyond a shadow of a doubt. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. His name is put upon you. He shall bless you.